My name is Jake Brewer. I'm the Campaign and Engagement Director at the Sunlight Foundation. And we're really excited about not only all those reasons that you guys are here, but also that there's so many different types of organizations represented in this room, a lot of different ideological perspectives. There's about 100 people registered, and if you went down the list of people who said, you know what, that sounds really great. I would love to come learn more about how we can build a movement, a campaign across the country to make government more open and transparent. It was everybody from, and I hope it's okay to say these publicly. If anybody would like me not to, I guess this may be too late. But, I mean, we're looking at everybody here from the Heritage Foundation to the Center for American Progress to the Cato Institute to Tea Party organizers to OFA organizers to folks that represent really the full spectrum of what it means to be involved in politics and government in this country. And that's just a really neat thing to be able to say, and this is a really remarkable group of people for that reason. So I'm not going to talk too much. We're going to have what we'd like to keep as a really informal conversation, really open this up. There's a lot of brilliant minds that are not on this stage at all and kind of out here, so we'd like for it to be as much of a conversation as possible. We'll briefly introduce these folks. I'm not going to read through their resumes or their bios. I know how painful that is. I've been in lots of events where that happens, and if you want to, I suspect you could probably Google them. But first and foremost, we have Ryan Hopkins, who's joined us from Pittsburgh today. He's part of the Public Square Project and really focusing on government transparency on a really local level, which we think is just extraordinary, and it's one of the areas that we hope to talk a lot more about. Jenny Hunt, who's head of the Google Public Works office here, or lab, actually, which I think is a much better name than office. We have Jim Harper, who's the director of technology policy at the Cato Institute. You've seen him all over TV, I'm sure. And Jose Antonio Vargas, who's joining us from New York, and his train just got in, so he rushed over here, and we appreciate it. Who's the Technology and Innovations Editor at the Huffington Post, and formerly of Washington Post, too. So a lot of you guys from DC know him as well. And I've asked these guys to talk a little bit about their experience with government and actually getting information out of government. These guys are policy folks, they are technology folks in obviously a corporation with Google. They're working on the local level, they're working on the national level, they're involved with the media, and they've had a lot of interaction with government information and trying to understand government in a more transparent and a more open way. So I've asked them to talk a little bit about their experience with that and why having a more open, transparent government would be a good thing. And then we'll actually take questions as they come. So I'm going to try and facilitate. If it doesn't work, we'll stop. In true campaign kind of unconference fashion. If you guys are too rowdy, then we'll shut you down. That was a little funny, come on. All right, okay. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit here first and then kind of see what questions from the crowd come up, and then we'll talk a little bit about the campaign, and we'll get you guys out of here by about 3:30 or so. With a happy hour after, so don't miss that. And Ryan, if you don't mind kicking us off.
Sure. First, I'd like to thank Jake and thank the Sunlight Foundation for inviting me here. Their leadership on these transparency issues has been so crucial, and we're so excited that they're sort of bringing this campaign and taking it wider and bringing it down to the local level. I am the founder of an organization called the Public Square Project, which is a new nonprofit startup based in Pittsburgh, and our mission is to improve the quality of local government in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, by improving access to public information, making government more transparent, and the crucial piece we think is educating citizens about the policymaking process. Our goal really is to bring more people into the process. We have a lot of talent in Pittsburgh, a lot of talent that is not talking to city government, county government, and so the first step in making that happen is to make government information more available and accessible so we know what baseline we're working from in our efforts to improve local government. And so that's what our organization is doing. We've just been around for the last year. During the last year, we've been focusing on creating a hyper-local citizen journalism platform in Pittsburgh. The idea is to get more eyes and ears on the ground to keep local government more accountable, and also to sort of fill the gaps in news coverage that we see in Pittsburgh. And so that's what we've been working on, and we hope to take our platform further in 2010 with Sunlight's help.
Very cool. And real quickly, I'm going to add that if you didn't notice all the cameras, we are on the record here. And I know there's a lot of folks who, there's some sensitivity. In fact, some folks who may have spoken here are not able to because of some of their positions. So what we're going to do is if you have a question, you prefer not to ask it on the record based on wherever you might be in your position or whatever your job might be. If you find Gabriella Schneider over there, and you would like to ask it publicly and have somebody answer it, that's fine. Just have her ask it, and she won't identify you in any way. But just wanted to, if you guys have questions, that's fine to throw them out that way too. Just want to make that clear. And as soon as we're over, come up and talk to us off the record too, just in case there's any concerns with that.
Sounds great. Hi, I'm Jenny Hunt. I'm part of a new team here at Google that's part of Google Research. We started as a 20% effort, which at Google, we get to spend about a day a week on projects that folks care about. So about 2 years ago around the election, we wanted to see how easy we could make it for voters to find their voting location, the hours that be open, how they could vote through absentee ballot. And what we realized was this was a pretty tricky problem to solve. And even though a lot of people, like many in this room, are working hard on the challenge of transparency, when it comes to helping any voter across all 50 states find this information in a single place and make sure that it's up to date and hopefully as accurate as possible, it was a pretty big challenge. And so from there we realized that it was also a big challenge in government information. So we began to work across different teams to see, for example, what public statistics are most citizens looking for that's somewhat hard to find. Earlier this week, a team released the top 20 stats, and they found, for example, that school comparisons are a piece of public data that a lot of people have difficulty finding for their own communities. So we've begun to put together an effort across different teams to see how we can work with many of you in the room and with government agencies to see how we can be citizen-centric in our approach to transparency, to make sure that basic information like health information, education information, or even weather information is easily available online and accessible and understandable by a common citizen, not just a statistician. So one of the reasons we're excited about what Sunlight's doing and what many in the room are doing is because about a year ago we were meeting with a government official to really talk to them about technology platforms, and this government official had a lot of control over how information was made available online, and they said very specifically, until the public gets involved in this issue and sets a level of expectation on how our information should be available, how frequently it should be available, it'll be difficult to really move the needle. So hopefully by what Sunlight and many of you are doing today, we can move the needle this year.
Ginny and I actually, we were talking recently, and we realized we had a common experience of, we grew up about 30 miles apart in rural Middle Tennessee. We didn't know that until we moved to DC, but Ginny comes from the walking horse capital of the world. This is a big deal. And I come from the mule capital of the world. I like to think I win on that one. But we both realized that you couldn't just type in, as smart as the Google algorithm is to try to find information, typing in budget Shelbyville, Tennessee, or budget Columbia, Tennessee wasn't something that we could do. Even just finding really basic type of information about how our tax dollars were spent was something that neither of us were able to do, despite having access to some of the best tools out there. And I think those are the types of things that a lot of us have experienced, but don't even necessarily realize is such a big problem because it's so pervasive. Anyway, I just had to say that Ginny's from the walking horse capital
Right.
of the
Glad
world.
that's on the record.
Well, hi everyone. My name is Jim Harper. I'm Director of Information Policy Studies at the Cato Institute, and I'm also the webmaster of WashingtonWatch.com. I actually get a little nervous. I do a lot of public speaking, as Jake referred to. I get a little bit nervous at events like this because you all know the subject matter as well as I do, maybe as well as we do. I'd much prefer an audience that is sort of, not paying attention, distracted. So I'm much more comfortable testifying in Congress. Thank you. It's one of my favorite lines, and it was a good opportunity to use it. I appreciate your indulgence. I do wear two hats, and so I want to talk just a little bit about ideology, because I work for an ideological think tank, and so we sort of start with right answer, and then can the policy ever possibly get there? And a thing that excites me about transparency, the work of the Sunlight Foundation, and thank you, Sunlight, Jake, for having us here. Thanks for the T-shirt. Woo! A thing that excites me about transparency is that it is a pan-ideological good, right? So if it's fair to segment, and it's obviously more complicated than this, but you can say that libertarians and conservatives generally want more transparency because they think that that'll lower demand for government. We can have smaller government, better run government, what have you. Liberals and progressive, again, sort of unfair groupings, but but they see transparency as an opportunity to validate government and to root out corruption. I'll take that. I'll take that as a win-win. I'd rather have a well-running, non-corrupt government, even as a libertarian, than a overly large, failing government. And so this is an opportunity for everybody, and I've tried to make the mark through Cato, through my mouthpiece there, that everybody should be on board with this. And I think it's a great group that's here representing all kinds of interests and all kinds of perspectives on things. We can agree on getting facts, getting real information to work with, because that's much better than just rumor and pure ideology and things like that. Let me take off that hat and put on my webmaster hat, which is a very different one. Washington Watch is a site. It's I don't pay attention to the statistics very much, but it might be the 3rd place or 4th place federal legislative site. Very excited to be in the top 10 still. But we basically put a Web 2.0 skin on the Thomas Legislative Database and let people play around. I've gotten 115,000 comments now on at least one law that's passed. So something's good happening, and much more will happen. But one of the projects that I've gotten into, I want to tell you about a little bit, is gathering earmark data. In the last budget cycle, the House and Senate Appropriations Committees and leadership both decided that earmark information should be put online, and so required requesters of earmarks to put those earmarks online. And they all did, with maybe a few exceptions. And they did it in HTML, and they did it in good PDFs, and they did it in scanned PDFs, and they put up PDFs of each individual earmark request separately scanned. It was a nightmare, but with the support of the Sunlight Foundation, I hasten to add, I put together a crowdsourcing project where we created a form to put this as data into a database and invited Washington Watch visitors and the public to get involved. And with some good write-ups on Ars Technica and Tech Dirt and a variety of other places, blog posts from people in this room, we got the word out. And along with dozens of people, some hardcore earmark hunters, got together and we collected over 40,000 earmark requests, which I think was a really incredible success. It's something I in no way ever want to do again. And so the point of the Public Equals Online campaign is to have the government give you good data in the first place, rather than having to take PDFs and figure out what the data is, draw the data out of it. I'll make a pitch for a website I put together with colleagues and with the support of many folks here called earmarkdata.org. That's a campaign site where we're asking the public to ask Congress to give us earmark data in good formats. And it's a site where we're organizing coders and developers to generate a schema. We know a lot about it, having done it once, but there's a lot more mind space out there that can help contribute to developing the schema. So earmarkdata.org is my one pitch. If you didn't catch that, I run WashingtonWatch.com. That's my other pitch. The one gloss I'll put on Public Equals Online, which I think everybody should support, obviously, is that Public Equals Online equals in good formats. It's just too long a URL, but that's the real
way too long.
That's the real goal, and I think it's a great thing for everybody to be on board with. So thanks.
Jim's actually squatting on that URL, so we couldn't buy it from him. This is a pitch-friendly zone, by the way. This is the type of nascent field that really needs a lot of innovation. So if you're doing something really cool, say it. That's okay. We need a lot more folks doing what the types of things that all these guys are doing. Jose?
Great. Can you, I guess I'm on mic. I'm only as good as my reporting, and so, yeah, he's probably right. You guys are probably a lot smarter than I am on all of this stuff, so let me just make sure that I say that. And I'm coming here, I guess, from more of a reporter perspective. So I was with the Washington Post for 5 years. So I lived there for 5 years, coming from San Francisco. And I guess to me, I covered cops when I was younger, covered City Hall. So you do a lot of FOIA requests, right? But what I think is interesting is the media, the mainstream media at large, still kind of don't really grasp this idea of the me in media, like the me in media, right? And I think what all these new technologies are allowing us to do is really, that muscle is continuously being flexed. And I think in many ways, the mainstream media, which, when I was part of the political campaign corps, it was fascinating and really disgusting in many ways to see how poorly a lot of mainstream reporters look down on like people and voters as if they have, like they own the data, they own the copy, it's theirs. It's not theirs to share, right? What's interesting about that is this is where you see the tension between, let's use WashingtonPost.com as an example, which is, I love that paper, I worked there, I'm grateful to having worked there. But that site is still working to make sure that they're providing as much data as they should be providing. And I think what's interesting for these mainstream media news outlets is trying to figure out where they fit in the larger ecosystem of the web. How can they work with organizations from the left or the right or whatever watchdog group to make sure that the readers are getting as much up-to-date, real-time information as possible? So that's one thing that I wanted to make sure that I point out. The second thing is, I can't think of a more, I think there are two words in the social web that are basically at the top when I'm thinking about tech culture. I think it's privacy. I think we all know that, right? Kind of the battle for that. And the second is transparency. I can't think of a more important word in politics than transparency. And I think it's to the testament of the Sunlight Foundation, by the way, to be able to be in a room where you have Tea Party activists and MIBO, OFA people and conservatives. I don't know, in my 5 years here, I didn't usually get to a lot of rooms where people are in the same room together, so that's great. But what Ginny said that I think is really interesting is expectation. We have to meet people where they're at, right? And a small little anecdote, I grew up in Mountain View, actually, where Google was the headquarters, before Google came there. And I came home in October of '08, a month before the election, and I was dragged to speak to a middle school journalism class. This is school in Los Altos that had a journalism class for middle school kids. And, I was talking about the campaign, and of course I'm from, I had a BlackBerry with me, and this kid raises his hand, his name is Naeeb, a Pakistani immigrant kid, raises his hand and says, "Have you downloaded Obama's iPhone application yet?" I had a BlackBerry, so I hadn't downloaded the iPhone application yet. And then he takes out his thing, he's like 13, and he proceeds to talk about where Obama was at that moment, right? How much money was being raised in Montana, where the nearest precinct was within 10 miles of his house. And this idea that politics was like right there in his pocket, he just took it out, right? And he had a certain expectation as to what is transparent and what he can see and what he can read. I think in many ways that's the challenge for politicians and the challenge for the media and the challenge for all of us to make sure that we provide, because that kid is only going to get older, he's only going to vote, right? And he's probably going to think that the government is way too, he already thinks it's way too behind to begin with. But I think we need to meet people where they're at. And I think you can't just do it. It has to be done in conjunction with the media, who writes very, not poorly, but they don't write enough about transparency and open media in general. And also, of course, I think it's great that, the Transparency Caucus that's being formed, at least is being talked about being formed. That's great. Yeah.
That's great. So I want to make sure that if there are any questions, there are mics on the side. You can also just kind of raise your hand and throw them up. But there's a lot of potential questions to be asked. So I actually have one to start, and I'm going to start with Ryan. Mm-hmm. You're working on a very local level to try to get people engaged. What is helping to facilitate that? Why are people becoming more interested? When you are successful, what does that look like?
Well, I think that what we are trying to do, and I think the Public Equals Online campaign is really going to help in this, is we're trying to find a language and a way to talk about transparency that connects transparency itself, which we know is a public good, with the concerns that people have at the local level. Everything from filling potholes to figuring out where their city council people are spending their tax dollars. And so I think when we're successful, that's what happens. We connect that. People think, oh, an online database of certain information, makes the whole process work better. It makes us have, local government is much better in that case. And I think that's really what we're focused on. And to be honest, it's been a challenge too to make people see that everybody wants transparency. Everybody sees that as a good, but to connect that, to find the right language to connect that to their everyday concerns, I think has been a challenge. And
what are the types of things that you say? Like when do people go, you know what? Yeah.
Well, I think when you maybe a concrete example is in order. Recently in Pittsburgh, we had we have a lot of aging infrastructure in Pittsburgh, like many cities do, and we recently the water authority there recently adopted a policy of insurance. Everybody would be insured. All of their sewer lines would be insured. So if your sewer line collapses, you have it fixed. It's $5 a month. You can opt out of it. You have 6 months to opt out of it. It was implemented. Everybody lauded it as a fantastic policy. Then it was found out that the executive director of the authority had financial ties to the people providing the insurance. And so what happened was a really good public policy, something that really was really good for Pittsburgh, was tarnished because of a lack of transparency. And so when we say to people, these are the kinds of things that are sacrificed, we might have to sacrifice good policies if transparency is not in the forefront of our mind. Those are the kinds of things, I think those are the kinds of places where we can be successful.
And I guess I have another question too. You're very interesting because you're not one of these weirdos. We're all weirdos, by the way. If you don't feel like a weirdo, we're all a little bit weird. We're in DC and we,
care about this
You guys
stuff?
are laughing, you guys know, I don't have to say. But not always in touch, let's say, with the real world in our think tanks and in our national headquarters, in our academic settings, I should say. So I'd be curious, in a place like where you are and in what you're doing, are you finding that it's appealing to kind of the non-political crowd as well? Kind of like Jose was talking about?
Yeah, that's been a challenge, to be honest. Kind of broadening the scope. I think people who are in the know and involved really do, they get it. I think we have a lot of good media outlets in Pittsburgh that really get it too. But I think what Jose was talking about is absolutely right. It's got to be, the media really has to be involved in whatever efforts are going on. And I think, they can really help us take that message to the next level if we have all of our media outlets, really, singing from the same chorus sheet when it comes to transparency. So.
Cool. And Jim, I was going to say, you've got a lot of experience with this.
Well, I'll share some thoughts that riff off of some of the other commenters. I tend to think about what I'm doing with Washington Watch, not so much as satisfying a public desire for transparency, but as real product. Like, what's the end product that an ordinary person, a non-nutcase out there wants? and it's kind of like, someone's ordering a sandwich. Do they want to know, what kind of steel was used to slice the bread? No, they want the sandwich. Just give me the sandwich. And trying to figure out what people really want from us at the end of the game is hard. And certainly getting the data that's needed to present that really cleanly and easily is hard. I'd rather be the media than work with the media is maybe one thought. And I mean fully user-generated media. I'll give you the data, you play with it. You edit the wiki article, you rate the project, all these kinds of things. One of my colleagues, speaking of rating projects, Jerry Brito, on the earmark data project, he created a site called Stimulus Watch, where he took a bunch of projects that the U.S. Conference of Mayors had put out there as stimulus-worthy, and he invited the public to go figure out if those were good projects, vote them up, vote them down, write about them, things like that. I've done that had some success with earmarks, where the public comes on and says, I know this business, I'm suing this business because they didn't pay their bills. That's really good generation of information. That's the media, that's the public being the media that presents all this stuff. I hasten to add that it's to my regret that people really want a lot of politics. I would rather have people focusing on policy. Should this bill pass or not? They'd rather talk about how much they hate this guy and how much they love that guy.
That doesn't happen at all.
It's unfortunate because I start to realize that politics is sort of entertainment, and it keeps a lot of people interested and agitated and burns a lot of energy. But I think the productive conversation is over on policy, and blending the two together is a real challenge. it'll take some insight I don't yet have onto how to get folks sort of shifting from the hot stuff to the stuff that's real.
Yeah. Is there any examples? Yeah.
Jake, sort of taking on what Jim was saying, people interested in the end result, because policy is just a starting point, right? Okay, so how do you get to focusing on the end result, and then tracing the threads back, to policy? Was the policy effective? You might try something that's not very effective, or you're talking about the situation where somebody was involved who was questionable. Mm-hmm. So before you commit to the policy, are the players out in the open? Are you transparent about who's involved? Did those questions come up? So I'm interested in what's the role as you're building it here of the people in helping to add to that kind of the linkages and all the threads in the transparency.
That's a big question.
We've got a lot to say about that, but I actually would be first curious kind of where you guys are coming from.
I mean, I would say getting to a point where we have data-driven sort of policymaking, I think, is an ideal for all of us. I think one of the challenges is hopefully we have enough data out there to see and solve problems as citizens or as policymakers. I think the challenge is a lot of times we work backwards. We see the problem and then we try to figure out what caused this, and we then realize we don't have the relevant data to put together to even understand what the various causes could be. So I think in many times, it's almost a reverse cycle, but hopefully we're getting to a point where we're spotting enough problems. The problem spotting itself is transparent, and then the process of identifying what information we need to understand the problem and solve it, both the citizens and private and public sector, is transparent through each step. So that we can, for example, leverage a lot of the social innovations that are happening where you do see regular citizens. I think we all want to make sure our communities are as strong, healthy, and safe as they could be, and we're willing to contribute pieces of information if we know what's needed to help address a problem.
And a couple examples of that, I think, too, are particularly interesting. We think a lot about data quality and different types of data at Sunlight. And one of the things that we use as an example often is that when a plane went down in the Hudson River, all of a sudden, data about bird strikes with airplanes became very interesting, right? Before that, no one cared about bird strikes in airplanes. No one was thinking about how that could be relevant. Not a whole lot of people were thinking about, accelerator, what would you call that? Toyota's problem. Not a lot of people were thinking about the testing data on cars necessarily in a big public conversation before something was wrong and then people wanted that data. And so a lot of times, as Jenny pointed out, we're starting, once there is a problem, and then we're starting to dig for data versus if government data that's available or that's already public in many cases is online in real time, people can then actually start to look at those things far ahead of time. They can be preventative and do lots of other things. Are there other questions, but kind of based on the stuff that the folks have said?
I think that's a key point too. Is the real-time aspect of this. If the information's out there, before these decisions are made, I mean, I think that's an incredibly crucial piece.
One of the things that excites me about what's going on with people in this room is, and I know this will be mean to some of my friends who are also here, is that we're sort of like the new school of transparency. The FOIA school, I won't say old, but the FOIA school is like, okay, what happened? Let's figure out what happened. Let's figure out why that decision was taken. Let's go back in time. And the new school, I think that they're both equally important. But the new school is, let's have that data out there from the beginning. And having that data out there from the beginning changes behavior. It's not going to be the same data. It's going to be, okay, everything I do, and this is certainly possible. It's fascinating to me. I'm a member of a FACA committee, Federal Advisory Committee Act Committee, the DHS Privacy Committee, which met this morning. And we go through extraordinary measures not to have all the committee members together or on the same email thread, because that would have to be made public. And we need to switch that kind of dynamic, so that everyone assumes it will be public and act as though it will be. It should be, in my opinion, all of it. But there are these huge cultural problems to overcome when all data is just online. It's public data is online data. It'll be a better functioning government because people will realize, okay, I can't back channel this stuff. I'm just going to do the right thing from the beginning rather than try to avoid getting caught.
Absolutely. And for the sake of time, I'm gonna, if questions happen, I want to talk a little bit about the campaign. That is what we're here for, is to kick off a big campaign and want to invite all of you to be honest. One of our big goals is that you would say, as your organization or you as an individual, wants to support this campaign by the end of this, and we'd love to talk to you about it afterwards. So I want to go through a little bit of that, but please, again, stop me. You guys are being a little bit shy. I know a lot of you in this room, and I know a lot of you have a lot more to say than you're saying right now. So there's a hand.
Yeah, I think this is a fantastic time to be involved in politics in Washington, in technology, in this country. And I just wanted to mention that with the previous healthcare vote, the hundreds of millions that went to Nebraska and went to other states, the political dealings that go on, which are just normally accepted as part of politics, I think the transparency elevation has made that not the discussion as much in this current round of voting. That even the White House saying, everyone will get the same deals. So I think that you all should applaud yourself, anyone who's part of making this change in government practice.
Cool, thank you. Is it cool to, show of nods, cool to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing next, if I can find the clicker?
Jake, one question.
Oh yeah, sorry, Zach.
This is for you, Jose, but I guess I'd like to hear everybody's response if you have something to say. Having worked in the media, in mainstream media, and certainly in a leader in the new media, what is the holdup about the adoption? What's the holdup in the adoption of these tools? Why is the media not jumping onto them when it's a force multiplier? It makes reporting easier. Is it a cultural change that has to happen? Is it what's stopping it?
I mean, we're talking about. I love Walter Pincus. I mean, I don't know if anybody here know Walter Pincus. He's like one of the top. I mean, this is a top investigative guy, knows his sources well, and classic reporter. But I remember when the Washington Post introduced emails, the fact that you could email him, he was really pissed about that. He was like, why? Oh shoot, maybe Walter might be listening. He was not happy about that at all. Because all of a sudden, he has to reply to all these emails from people, like how dare them question my method of reporting? How dare them ask what my partisan, where I come from politically, right? And so I think that's a part of the cultural shock. A lot of it too, I'm finding out. So I moved to the Huffington Post last summer. The technology. So I work at the Huffington Post, which has tripled, quadrupled its traffic within the past. We're not even 5 years old. And what's been staggeringly exciting is to kind of see how the technology that is used to build the site and the fact that it's so hooked up with Twitter modules and Facebook fans and all of that, and to see how news becomes interactive in a way how it spreads, right? I consider it a great kind of education because, as a reporter, I've been a reporter for 12 years, like working at newspapers, it wasn't, newsrooms, I think, are facing the biggest struggle here because it's a very closed-in kind of culture, We're not used to open ourselves up. I mean, look at editorials. You don't even know who signs these editorials that get written up, right? How dare you wonder how come we came to this conclusion? And so I think, which is why back to actually Mark's point, the media's role in this, as far as I'm concerned, every week should be Sunshine Week, really. And I think organizations need to find, like Sunlight, and other organizations need to find a way to work with these large media organizations. I mean, they're not dying; they're just struggling. And I think when they get better, when things start to get elevated, there needs to be a much more of a partnership that is really not in place at the moment.
What about Huffington becoming a leader for that? Taking any story that's written by one of your editors that's going to talk about a congressional issue, embedding the bill widget, putting that data into the reporting, not just opening up yourselves, but embedding the data and that data mindset. I
mean, let me be upfront about this too. I mean, people have a perception about the politics of the Huffington Post. I mean, I know when I joined it, one of the first things I did is called people like David Almasy. It was like, okay, if I'm going to go to the Huffington Post, are you still going to talk to me? To make sure that, my conservative Republican sources don't just think, at the end of the day, in my opinion, I think we are in an era in which the stories should speak for themselves. You know, like one of the greatest, for me, I followed Sarah Palin around in Ohio for a couple of weeks and in northeastern Ohio. What was fascinating was meeting a lot of people who were really convinced that, a lot of Palin supporters who were convinced that Obama is Muslim. And then I basically went to Google with them, you know, typed in that information, and literally figured out how they process information, right? So like, well, I don't trust the Washington Post or the New York Times. I trust this or that says that he's this. So back to this point, I think the role of the informed citizen is really crucial here. And I think this is something that doesn't get talked a lot about, is the learning gap. You know, like I come from a family of immigrants who have been here since like the 70s and 80s. A lot of my family members have never voted. They just like to think that they just live here. That's all. They're not going to be a part of this, but that's just one family, of course. I'm not saying that that's representative of all immigrant families. But I think there's a learning gap, and somehow in the way that in this evolving process, I hope that too gets addressed. So it's just not all of us know-it-alls and know-it-us, you know, all of us that gets on Foursquare and Twitter the moment it launches, that gets on this transparency bandwagon. I think that's very important. Or else we're going to have basically a divided kind of, you know, citizenry in the way we look at this.
Take one more question over here.
All right, this was, Jenny, this was inspired by your comment about the problems you had with voting registration, but of course, you know, if anyone wants to jump in. I'm curious about the problem of federalism, and what I mean by that is that, you know, the Open Government Directive calls for an open government standard throughout the federal government, but each state and each little municipality is allowed to have their own data standard, and not only that, they're allowed to call their agencies whatever they want to call them, and they're allowed to structure their websites however they want to structure them. And so if you're dealing with one entity, it's really easy to make that entity's data searchable. But if you're dealing with a bunch of jurisdictions, and yeah, I mean, I could write a bill that is constitutional that would force them to adopt a data standard, but good luck getting it through the Senate. So, you know, how do you get, you know, short of an act of Congress, how do you get states and localities to say, hey, like, it's important that we have our data be, you know, in some sort of format that allows, that allows people to search it the same way they search another state's data or another locality's data, so that when I move from location to location, there's a place I can go to get whatever government information I need.
I can't speak to all of that, but two anecdotes. I mean, one of the ways that we worked with states to adopt a standard for the Voting Information Project was that we did let them know that we were going to make it much easier for them on their own websites to let people find and access this information, and they could also be sure that their official information would become the default source of this information wherever it was around the web, including search engines like Google. So I think we tried to prove to them the benefits of taking small steps to standardize, and I think it was also, another example is transit information, which is becoming more commonly standardized amongst many transit authorities, and there it really also came from the perspective of the citizen. I mean, more people will take public transportation if it's very easy for them to access and see how a route through public transportation might be shorter or equivalent to, you know, driving their own vehicle or other, you know, methods of transportation. So I think in many ways it comes back to this notion of how we tie the citizen to the process as well, to see that there is demand, and if citizens do have access to this information easily, they will start hopefully engaging and using it well. And also for sites like ours, it's very difficult to provide a 50-state solution or, you know, answer to a single set of data if we get it in 500 different formats. So we're trying to prove that people are looking for it. They do want to find official government information, but if they're unable to access it, it'll continue to lie hidden in certain government websites. Although I'm sure others can weigh in on this as well.
Well, I maybe primarily wanted to express my pique at the phrase, short of an act of Congress, how do we get states and localities to do this stuff? As a person who came to Washington because of federalism, hoping to move power back to the states and people, I hope we wouldn't use an act of Congress to get states to do it. The way to do it is consensually, and that's the way to work best. States, localities, mayors, they all have groups that they get together with to organize themselves. At the legislative level, there's NCSL and ALEC, U.S. Conference of Mayors, counties, just about every layer of government has good groups. Enough energy from folks like us, especially to those groups, to say, hey, here's how it ought to happen. Just like with setting any standard, you get enough consensus behind it, and most everybody else will fall into line. They'll learn from one another how to do it right, and the outliers, you just have to beat on them until they do start presenting their data in the right format. So hopefully it won't take an act of Congress if we care about federalism.
And there's been some experience that, and one of the things we'll talk about, and one of the precursors to the Public Equals Online campaign was something called Read the Bill. Have anybody heard of Read the Bill? Seen a little bit of that? One really extraordinary thing we learned through that campaign was that we can actually get what we want. We can get Congress to do some of the things we want without actually getting any legislation passed. In fact, there's a completely stalled, going nowhere, nothing happening with it bill in the House of Representatives, HRES 554, to require that legislation be online for 72 hours before it's debated. And if you read the papers about, let's say, the health care bill, a lot of the major legislation that's happened in the last 6 months, they've actually said beforehand, we are going to make sure this is online for 72 hours just simply because the public is demanding that it'll be there. So without any congressional act, without any legislation, we've actually seen some cases in which we can get what we want without having to push a specific policy. And that's the more that citizens get involved, the more that we can kind of discover things like that.
I definitely think it's a matter, to bring around to something Ginny said at the beginning, I think it's a matter of expectation. I think, especially at the citizen level, if we show what's possible, I think it's very possible to quickly, form a constituency for these kinds of transparency issues. I mean, if, showing people, I've showed people the first time opencongress.org, when they see that, we can do this, this is possible, and once that groundswell of expectation comes up, I think the policymakers are going to have no choice but to take notice. And one of the things we've seen locally is that transparency initiatives have been sort of going in fits and starts as political leaders see the political fit. What we need is sort of a sustained campaign like the Public Equals Online campaign to sort of bring that constant attention and that constant pressure from below to make policymakers see that there is advantage for everybody in this.
Mm-hmm. And one note to tie that to what is that I think it's one thing to say that the bill's online 72 hours in advance, but a critical role the media plays in filling that education gap is how many Americans actually understood what's contained within this bill, and how, at what point do we actually sort of reach mainstream in terms of awareness and comprehension of what these bills contain. I think that's a key role that the media is playing as well.
That's great. We're going to take one more question. Oh, sorry. Turn that. Okay. We're going to take one more question, then we do need, for the sake of time, to do this, but all of these questions, again, as we kind of mill about after this thing is over, as well as for the next couple hours, there'll be folks probably having beer. So we can continue to talk about it as a favorite DC pastime there as well.
All right, well, my question is actually, as we move to be a more transparent nation, we have much more information available to the general public and to anyone to sort of crunch. Who's really going to be the champion for complexity of issues, complexity of making public policy and effective public policy? Because I feel like there's a big push, or at least sort of a lot of people who don't want to release the information are like, well, if we release it, it's really easy to grab just individual pieces, especially in a very sort of partisan media environment like we have now. It's easy to find an individual piece that you ultimately want to release to your group to sort of discredit or ultimately hurt an individual to push an agenda. So I know that there's a lot of, people don't want to open up the sausage factory because they're like, well, we know how to make the sausage, and nobody really understand exactly what goes into this. So who needs to be that champion for the complexity of governance?
I think we all do. Is Jesse Thomas here? I saw him on the list. He's a good example. I think there's a lot. I think that one of the new languages that people are starting to speak around open data is the language of statistics. And I know there's some of the Sunlight Labs guys here that are translating some of how this data can start to make sense to a lot of us and what we can actually do with it. Obviously, I think the role of journalists and those types of people to really bring this down, or bloggers, or people who are diving in, folks like Jim, who are kind of in between policy and media, folks like Ryan or Ginny. But one of the areas I'm most excited about right now is this idea of visualizing data and design and making it really coherent, interesting, and meaningful to citizens in a way that they can kind of understand how they can act after that. And actually, it's one of the things we'll talk about here in a second, too.
If I can I think my answer might be an equal opposite to yours, or maybe perfectly consistent. I'm not exactly sure. I don't think there's any real benefit from complexity. I don't think there's any necessary good in complexity. And I kind of think of, frankly, the Read the Bill campaign, certainly not as a literal campaign that we want each member of Congress to go through line by line, but it's as much a push for readable bills. That is, bills that are of a size and scope that the public can get a handle on what's going on. So more simplicity and not complexity. A germaneness rule, that is a rule that Congress could only consider in one bill something of a single subject matter. There are many states that have these kinds of rules in various places. That would be good. That's not complexity, that's more simplicity. My sense, and it's just a gut sense, I don't have any statistics to back it up, is that a lot of the disquiet in the country today is because all this stuff is happening in Washington. We know, because we see it happening other places, that we could get information about it, but we're not getting information about it. It's not being made clear to us. The expectation for policymaking is moving along with the internet, whereas the policymaking is still pretty much not past 1994.
Right. And so I'm going to move on for the sake of time. Again, appreciate all the questions so far, and there will be more opportunity, hopefully, for conversation on this stuff. But I'm going to hop down here, and there's actually one of the most brilliant things I've ever heard said was by Vint Cerf, who works here. Actually, I don't know if he's still here or not, but he was in this office for a while. Anybody heard of TCP/IP, or the founder of the internet? You might call it that. There's a guy that works just around the corner here, and he was at a press conference with Larry Lessig. Anybody heard of Creative Commons? If anybody uses that. And Larry is very well known for using these very elaborate PowerPoint slides. And they were at a press conference sitting next to each other, and Larry turns to Vint, and Vint's a little bit older looking guy. He's helped found the internet. And Larry goes, "You should have a PowerPoint with this." And Vint Cerf turns to Larry and says, "You know, Larry, power corrupts, but PowerPoint corrupts absolutely." Yeah. So I'm going to violate this most brilliant piece of wisdom I received to kind of go through a couple things, mostly because I think some visuals are helpful in this kind of stuff. Really what I want to talk about here is, at the Sunlight Foundation, we've been around for 4 years now, and we've been really throwing spaghetti at the wall ever since. Basically trying to figure out what is going to work. We were founded to try to make government more transparent and more accountable, and if we thought that had happened before with the efforts that had been tried in the past, then we wouldn't have founded ourselves. We wouldn't have tried something new. And so we've really been just figuring out all along the way what works, and that's what we'll continue to do for quite a while. But that's how we ended up with the Public Equals Online campaign. And this is operating in the cloud, and so these slides may not have translated completely. Bear with me on this. But this is kind of what we started to realize when it came to transparency, right? Was that transparency really amounted to data. The way that we could actually make government more transparent was to focus on the data. And so the idea here is that government is really just made up of data and information about what's spent, what people do, who they're meeting with. Those are all schedules and data and information that we can get. And that we need to get that data online, accessible anytime, from anywhere, from your couch. You shouldn't have to walk into the basement of the Hart office building, which people in this room actually know where that is. Most people don't. They shouldn't have to come to DC to get these types of things. And then being there, we could actually start to make things transparent. Well, that's not actually the end game, right? Being transparent is not really where we're ultimately trying to go. We're trying to empower citizens. And really what we're trying to do is change the relationship that government has with its citizens and ultimately build trust. And we think trust will ultimately lead to more engagement and the grand ideal of things, a better democracy. So this is really blurry probably for a lot of you, but hopefully you'll check this out. To a lot of the points that have been talked about in here, and if you're in the back, you definitely can't see it, so I won't pretend that you can. Basically what we're talking about here is there's 4 things we really realized we needed, and we need to figure out how to do at a federal level, at a state level, and at a local level. And I apologize to the guys on the stage because you guys really can't see it. But the idea here is that there's a policy component. A lot of you guys in think tanks, a lot of you guys in academia thinking about these things. There's a technology component. Really, as some of the labs guys or some of the technologists in the room know and think about, you have to get that data, you have to make it usable, you got to put it in parsable, usable formats, stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of other folks. And then you got to translate that data, you got to make it meaningful, you got to give it context. And then once you have it, you got to be able to do something with it, and citizens actually have to care and want to do something with it. And so the idea of our campaign in many ways is to try to replicate this all over the country and not have to do it as an organization. We want to work with, all of you are doing most of these things in many ways, and that's really why we wanted to talk to you about this and why we think it can be potentially successful. But ultimately, we want to empower citizens and people everywhere to do that. This is a little bit of a statement. If we were just to shut our doors, if we were able to say that we were done, we could go home, we'd accomplished what we came to do, which we really hope we do, actually. Most nonprofits, I think, and I think a lot of you would agree, kind of exist to exist. And we really, really want to shut our doors at the Sunlight Foundation. We really want to be able to go home and work on something else and kind of free up some creative capital because we've actually created the thing that we wanted to create with all of y'all. So this is a bit of an idea there. And I'm going to go through these kind of fast, but we are now launching a campaign to get citizens involved in the work of creating a more open, transparent government. And we're going to do that, first and foremost, by focusing on the 2010 midterm elections and letting public officials everywhere know that when their constituents go to vote for them, that transparency and how that public official will be transparent to their constituents is on the mind of that voter. And so we're trying to ultimately get legislation passed. We're trying to build the national movement. These are kind of some of our goals. I'm going to move through these fast because no one really wants to go through a lot of these. But there's a lot of different efforts around policy in DC, at the state level, at the local level. And I've completely lost my voice, by the way, so I appreciate you guys bearing with me on that as well. But there's a lot of these different issues, and some of you guys recognize these things, some of you don't, and that's okay. The idea here is that one message, getting government information online in real time, kind of speaks to all of them. And so we can combine them and we can get citizens behind them this way. These are some of the components that really undergird and really provide the pillars of the campaign, something we call the 9 principles of open data. So what does it actually mean to be open? It has to be, if it's online isn't really enough, right? It actually has to stay there for a while. You can't just put up a really bad HTML file and put it up for a half second and then consider it to have been online and then go home, right? There's a lot more to it. So there actually has to be some standards and those types of things. And these are the types of things that provide those standards. On Tuesday, we released a new policy as well, or a new an act, actually, the Public Online Information Act, that'll also be one of the types of things that we want to promote through this campaign. All this stuff is on the website. We don't need to talk about it too much. What I do want to talk about a little bit with you guys in particular, because I think as partnerships are created and as folks around the country work on these things and actually go do this, that's what this is about, right? We're going to do this. We talk about, we have a lot of ideas, there's a lot of kind of really neat things happening, but in general, citizens aren't going around our country at their city level and at their state level and saying, you know what I really want is a democracy that works better through more transparent open data, right? But that's really at the heart of this whole thing, so that's how we need to message it. And the way we want to do that is really be open and try lots of new stuff. So when I say act like a movement, that's kind of what we mean. We want to work with a lot of you guys to say, we're going to lose a little bit of control here. We're not going to try to own everything. Put your style guides on, put your ideas online, allow people to mix and match them and try something new. Being open and authentic, I think you guys get that. But I think part of it too, and we work pretty hard at this at Sunlight, and we don't always succeed. In fact, we joke, most of the time we don't succeed at stuff. It's usually the stuff that we tried over and over and then finally makes it out that people kind of notice, right? And I think Google's great at that. I think Cato's great at that. Huffington Post's actually great at that. And Ryan, I suspect you're awfully good at it as well. But creating beautiful, compelling content that people can get behind is something we want to do, but also failing harder. Anybody know that? Anybody do that? Anybody know what I mean? Yeah, Jared? What does it mean? Yell it.
You gotta try really, really, really hard. A lot of times it just won't work.
That's right. Yeah, if a transparent government were easy, it would have been done already, right? But it hasn't been done. We haven't made this happen yet. We have to try a lot of stuff. In some cases, those things aren't going to work. And it has to be kind of okay. It has to be okay with funders. It has to be okay with bosses. It has to be okay with staff. People need to be a little bit okay with failure in trying this whole thing out. And sometimes that means the media needs to give us a break. Jose. Anyhow, so I want to walk through a couple of these things too, because I think it speaks to the ethos that we want to promote. And all of the real detailed components of the campaign can also be found on the website, which is www. Do we even need to say that anymore? No, right? publicequalsonline.com. Just all one word, publicequalsonline.com. It should have gone live about an hour ago. So hopefully while you guys were out, and hopefully anybody watching, if we got the live stream going, we're good, and they're watching too. But want to go through a couple of kind of the ethos of this, and again, stop me and ask questions through it, and challenge it if you want. But the idea here is, again, that after you guys leave, you'll really want to be part of this, and want to help make this happen. So we believe open, transparent government is something that we create. It's not actually something that is handed to us. It kind of speaks to, I think, several of the points. David was talking about kind of the citizen engagement. We've talked a lot about it. It's something we got to do. That said, government also has a responsibility to be transparent, but it won't get there on its own. It's worth stating some of these things. In some ways, they're obvious to us, but we want to get them out there and say them. A lot of people talk about we need to rise up against things, right? We don't actually think that necessarily has to be the case. You can incentivize positively, too. If all the negative incentives of the world had actually worked, we would get a lot of things. We would have gotten a lot more already from government, but we don't. So we can try both, but we'll use whatever works, but let's try to find some positive incentives, too. Has anybody ever seen Carrot Mob? Anybody know what Carrot Mob is? Matt, can you tell anybody what Carrot Mob is? Putting you on the spot.
Mob is not, stick mob is a normal mob where you go and attack someone for doing something. Carrot mob is when you go mob a company for doing something wrong. It's an incentive for them to perform things that you think are what they should be doing.
Exactly. So we can actually mob government in some cases for doing things really well. Sometimes they do. There's some of the folks in the room here that actually work within government, and we thank you for being here, actually, working really hard at what you do. Speaking of, changing behavior through something like a campaign is actually as important as getting a policy passed or getting something done on the ground. And there's not really any other way to say that, but this is probably one of the hardest things, right? And as part of that, technology isn't a piece of the pie, it's a pan, right? So it's about getting somebody not just to actually use email, but to engage. Our engagement with government can change it. I think there's a lot of people out there that may not believe that. And getting from here to there requires as many of us working together as possible. Oh, sorry, there's one more. And this is kind of goes back to that fail harder notion, right? Is that a lot of folks, especially organizations that have gained prominence, one of the nice things about being a 4-year-old organization is that, you know, if you screw up, it's kind of like, oh well, right? It's like being a kid or being a teenager. But the bigger an organization gets, the bigger government gets, the more that it's in the public spotlight, the more we allow perfect to stop us from actually taking action. And so through this campaign, we want to allow those type of things not to stop us. Couple more things here. We think, in general, this is just simply the right thing to do. This, getting government information online in real time so we can hold them accountable, them being government at every level. It's not just our representatives or senators. It's not just our executive branches, branch with lots of agencies. But it's all these different aspects of government. And ultimately, it's just kind of the right thing to do to make this happen. There's very rarely a campaign that I've ever been part of where it just kind of feels so naturally, almost moral, for a lack of a better term. So we're pretty excited about that. We think it's pragmatic. It's pretty basic. This kind of things helps a lot of people. There's a lot of information. If you run does anybody run a nonprofit? Yeah, several folks. I don't think there's any human services nonprofits in the room. But how much easier would it be if you're working on health issues in a local area or homelessness to actually get the data that government already has to help you with that service, right? It's not just about accountability. There's lots of other things that can happen. And we think it's a huge opportunity. We think we can create more jobs with open government data than the stimulus package has. If the heritage folks are here, they'll laugh anyway.
It should be hard.
But honestly, we think there is more entrepreneurial opportunity in this country through open government data than maybe any other thing. It's the oil well of the 21st century, right? It's the oil reserve. This is just a massive opportunity for enterprise. In Silicon Valley and DC, there's a huge tech sector. Guys like Jared are bringing people together to talk about new ideas here in DC and New York and all these different places, but also in Duluth, right? Anywhere people can start up a new business based on this stuff now. Duluth, Minnesota, by the way. That's a geography lesson. Come on, a little funny, just a little bit. As I think was talked, Jim talked about it too, and Jenny talked about it, but the data does change when it's proactive, right? When it's already out there, and people know that what they're going to do is going to be out there, how they're going to spend your money, how they're going to do whatever, what earmarks they're going to request. They quit requesting the bad stuff, right? They don't do it as often. And so by getting all this out there, we think we can start to solve some of those other problems too. These are all pretty basic talking points at this point. You guys are almost too smart to need explanation around this. One of the things for a lot of the advocacy groups in here, we do think open data can make your job a lot easier. And for public officials, I don't think there's any in the room. A couple initially RSVP'd. I think several of them are talking about another issue today. But we honestly think it'll help, right? I mean, there's a sense that a more transparent process for campaigning would actually hinder or be a detriment to a lot of campaigns. We think the opposite, right? We think more people want to vote for you, want to give you more money, because when you can pull out your phone and you can see how much money has been contributed already and how much was given in your local area, that's a good thing, and maybe even a proud thing, right? It doesn't have to be something that you're trying to hide. This is the one that I just think is great. And I don't think is there any full-time lobbyists in the room? Like, that's what you do for a living? There's a couple. I think we're supposed to come. I think they're also working on another issue today. But we think if you were creating a logical extension test, right, one of those things in a what do you do? A standardized testing, and you said AEIO and you put in U, you'd pretty much never, ever, ever consider teachers, firemen, nurses, and then think lobbyists as the next logical completion, right? Lobbyists, a lot of them will tell you that their job is fundamentally important to the democratic process. Could argue they're right. But right now, that's certainly not how they're thought of, right? But a more transparent process in which that included a lot of lobbyist disclosure, for instance, is the kind of thing that we can help to create through a campaign, and it's the kind of thing that can actually change the way that people think about things like lobbying. Lobbying is not a bad thing. In fact, most of us have probably done it or do it on a pretty regular basis, even if we're not full-time lobbyists. That's a good thing. We should keep doing it, and it should be okay. If any of you guys are in media and you get access to government data online and in real time, it changes everything. It changes everything. I won't even try to go through the bullet points, but so this is our campaign site. We've got a bunch of photos. In fact, if anybody would be willing after this to be photographed for the site, we've got a lot of photos that we need, and we want as many different folks. We pretty much have people on the site who work at Sunlight because they work at Sunlight, and they're sitting right there, so we can take their photo. In fact, that is a gorgeous photo of Noah Cunin back there. We got a lot of folks that'll be on the site. It's not just Noah. But what we're asking folks to do is sign a pledge, and we're going to use this pledge in a number of different ways. The pledge basically says, well, it doesn't basically say, it exactly says, government transparency is critical to creating a better democracy and of highest importance in how I cast my vote. I pledge through my sustained engagement to hold public officials accountable for being open and transparent. Now, it's a pretty basic thing to say, right? It's an easy kind of sign-up form. But the idea here is that you build political muscle. I think a lot of us have done this in the past, right? By bringing lots of people together that you can also target in specific areas. So now all of a sudden, let's say I'm in a competitive campaign or a competitive race in a district in whatever state. And there's 2 candidates coming down to the wire, and you're going to win or lose by 10,000 votes. Well, 6,000 people in that town who've all said, you know what one of the most important things to us is, among other issues, is that you are transparent or not, or you're going to help make government more transparent when you get there. Well, 6,000 people who've declared that to be very important then becomes very interesting to a candidate to say, this is something that I need to be thinking about. And so that's the type of thing we're trying to create across the country at a local level and a district level. It's something that can be used at the city level for town halls, for gubernatorial races. It's also something that could be used prospectively a couple years down the road in the next presidential race. And so we're starting here. This is how we're going to build political muscle to start. And there's lots of other things to happen after that. We can talk about them. But the very first thing is get behind this pledge, this petition, and that petition can also be used for new pieces of legislation. Now, we need a lot of partners to do this. We can't possibly even come close to doing this on our own. At the Sunlight Foundation, we are funding it fully. I want to be transparent about that. The idea is that we don't continue to fund it fully. We'd love for citizens to own this, to have a piece in this. We'd love to catalyze new projects around the country by spurring innovation with maybe a seed grant or matching funds or whatever it might be, but we're not looking to control completely, right? And so we need lots of folks like you guys to get behind with your organizational support, your, for lack of a better term, let's be honest about how we think about these things, like some of your organization's names lend a lot of weight, right? And those are really important things because it means, even just being here, that the idea that this group of people can get together, I look around the room and there really are I'm seeing very conservative Republicans, very liberal Democrats. I'm seeing folks that identify with nothing at all and ardently don't identify with anything at all. And I think that's wonderful. And yet, all of you find this to be a compelling enough issue that you're taking a couple hours or hour and a half, if I have anything to do with it, out of your day. And so we think we can go a long way with this. One of the things we want to do is have a much bigger conversation about this next week. If anybody's in town and would like to join us, Transparency Camp is essentially free. We're actually charging $20 this year simply because what happens in DC, and didn't happen today at all, was that people sign up for things but then don't actually come. Anybody ever done that? I never do it. So we're actually just getting people to put in a small amount so they don't forget their registration and actually do show up and commit to it instead of just reserving a name on a list. But the conversation really will be in large measure about how do we do this across the country? How do we make government more open and transparent? And with that, there's not a lot else that we have to say, although we may have a question from an anonymous source.
Is this on?
It is.
So my question is actually more of a request that you join us afterwards at RFD
Yes.
on 7th Street for a little OpenGov happy hour. Thanks.
That too, yes, we want to talk about this more. So that's kind of I'm going to sit back down because we do have a couple more minutes, and some folks, if you need to leave right now, that's fine. But what are our ideas about this? What are our feelings about this? What are kind of the things that are popping up for folks, if there's any? If not, that's cool. We'll go have a beer. Danny.
Yeah, my question kind of was going back to when we were talking about like the learning gap being an issue and kind of difficult engaging with people because they don't really know exactly what they're looking for. Has there been any sort of conversation or thought about taking some of the tools that you folks are developing at Sunlight and engaging like an education group that devises maybe like statewide curriculum? So for middle school, there's a class about government, and then boom, right in the class, they're looking at the real-time data. So then when they get older, they remember that, oh, this stuff is out there.
Yes, I mean, I can speak on behalf of Sunlight, but mostly, does that come up for anybody who's a teacher or a college educator or whatever? Does that come up for you, right? You're nodding your head, yeah? It does?
Several generations, several age groups, not just 15 to 25.
Awesome. Yeah, actually one of the coolest things that happened for us about 2 weeks ago was we did something called Sunlight Live, where we tried to connect data to a live event, which was a huge experiment for us. We weren't really sure if it would work at all, and it turned out pretty good. But one of the neatest things we saw on Twitter was an AP class from Kansas, high school AP class that was just tuning in as part of their government curriculum, right, to actually watch something and then see how the money was connected to the folks that they were talking to. So Danny, to your question, yeah, absolutely, we'd love to do that. We don't nearly have the outreach capacity to hit all the colleges in the country that we'd like to reach. If you know anybody that could help with that, we'd certainly love to talk. Cool.
Hi, my name is Femi, and I'm with mobilize.org. And I currently live in Charlotte, but I'll be moving to DC soon. But in Charlotte, we have an example of this that worked really well. Generation Engage, the League of Women Voters in Charlotte, and Kids Voting, the local chapter, got together and created charmecvotes.org. And it's actually the same, part of the URL is the same as our local government. So there's a charmec.org, and we just added it on at charmecvotes.org. And the League of Women Voters did their own, for years they've been doing voter guides that were paper versions, but we turned it into an online voter guide and made it really, really interactive. All of our candidates responded. We had over like 20,000 hits within a matter of a month and a half. So, I mean, we did this all on our own in a limited budget. We got a local college student to build the site. So it doesn't take a lot to actually make something like this happen and to really have an impact. We had students in elementary and middle school using the website as a tool to learn more about civics. So we just opened it up and just made it happen, and it was really successful, and they're going to continue it. So, and I'm sure they'd be interested in learning more about the public, Equals Online campaign. So.
Yeah, and well, we need help talking to folks, right? And we don't. There's no way to get to all these different nodes all over the country without lots of people sharing an idea and coming together around it. And it's not the Sunlight Foundation's idea. It's online transparent government, right? Brian, do you have any experience with that same idea?
No, I think I would echo what you say about doing these kinds of projects on a limited budget. We're actually an all-volunteer organization now too, so getting people interested and engaged in this doesn't necessarily have to be about coming up with thousands and thousands of dollars. It's about sort of showing people what's possible and showing them how to do that. But I will say too that we had a conference call with Sunlight a few weeks ago, and they've just been incredibly open, saying whatever resources we can provide, the tools that we've built here, please let us know. And that's something we're really interested in too, is taking those tools that you've developed for use at the national level and sort of seeing, using that as a starting point for what we're doing at the local level. So, yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think it's something that's exciting about a campaign like this, which is that there's so many local efforts and initiatives that are working well, whether it's in a single neighborhood or across the city, that hopefully what this campaign can do is connect those dots and put spotlights on what citizens are doing at a very local level that's working well, and also the tools that they're using, so those can be shared. Because I think that connecting these pieces is really going to do a lot to move everyone forward.
Cool. Question? You're up.
Hello. A Brit here, so probably no right to ask a question at all, but my name's Dominic Campbell from FutureGov. My question really is, where's the me in transparency? If there's no me in media, what would your sort of Twitter-length sales pitch be? Because most of stuff written about transparency is normally about this long and this boring. So what's the sort of Twitter-length sales pitch you'd give to an average person?
That's good. Honestly, if you can help us figure that out, we'd love that. It's one of those things, we try to make things as compelling and interesting as possible, and we've had a certain amount of success with that, but not at all. When I go home, I talked about where I'm from, which just ironically, it's never where anyone else in the room is from, but it actually is in this case. When I go home, no one knows what I do. No one is talking about government transparency or open data. It's not something that's on their minds on a day-to-day basis, or even if they do engage in politics, it's not something they're yet talking about in my home. Now, the interesting thing is, it is starting to happen. I've been to a lot of different cities over the last couple months, really, and seen a lot of you guys. Just in the last year, I would say that the amount of attention and interest in this stuff has grown. Really, we're starting to hit that hockey stick part of the curve. There's events all over the country now about open government, all over the country. I mean, there has been, I would say, at least a dozen 250 people or more events in the last year, where the year before that, I would say there maybe was one or two, right? I mean, you just think about people coming together around this stuff and organizing. But in terms of like saying in one sentence in the Twitter length, as you said, type of way of the silver bullet of communications, really, certainly have not found that yet. If anybody does, if anybody has figured out a way to really nail that anybody goes, yeah. Share that with everyone else.
One idea is to find things that are measurable. Find things that you can reduce to numbers. My favorite, and sort of anti-favorite, is President Obama's Sunlight Before Signing promise. Readers of the Cato blog will recognize it. About monthly, I check up on how he's doing with that promise, to post bills online for 5 days before signing them. He's currently 7 for 143, which is a .049 batting average. With baseball is a game we play here in the United States. That kind of thing, though, that because I've reduced it to numbers, maybe it's a little too useful for certain parties, gets picked up and carried around, and it means something. It's a chewable bite, and so I think measurable transparency, or transparency measures are just like anything. If you measure something, you tend to get more of it, and so little things like that, little stories you can tell about it. That issue is a great one, because I can write hundreds of blog posts over the next 3 years without thinking a new thought, and it's just a matter of churning it out. But it tells a good story, just numbers.
I think numbers help, and also this notion that we are shareholder democracy, and I think that's something that's starting to help amongst our peers, because I think it then drives us back to numbers as well, and it helps us look at numbers differently in terms of what we're investing in our communities and in this process.
Yeah, it's actually one of the points we kind of breezed over, but really, one of the things we talk about a lot, that has actually worked, to your point, Dominic, is that we've already paid for this stuff, right? This data is kind of ours already. We're already stakeholders in this. It's just a matter of now getting it and getting access to it. And that's something that resonates a lot around the country. The other thing we often joke about is for folks that are organizers, I wouldn't say that it necessarily resonates for someone like my aunt, is that potholes are kind of like the gateway drug to government engagement. Right? It's just that thing that's outside on the road that's just really annoying and you want somebody to take care of. And the idea that being able, with new tools and new ways of engaging, talking about iPhone apps or Android apps or whatever it might be, that you could take a photo of, and you guys actually, Tom Steinberg's doing some great work across the pond there around this stuff, and you guys too. But you could take a photo of a pothole that it uploads to a central place and that a government official is actually seeing that. Then you can send it to 10 of your friends and say, hey, guess what? I got a huge pothole in front of my, which now all the folks in DC have because of all the snow this winter. And say, we want this fixed. Now, you as an official, if you're the road guy, actually this can help you too, because now you know where people really want to be served. You're not just guessing. And those are the types of ways that often we can kind of get people to hook. But otherwise, we have a lot of work to do on the communication. That is, I would say, well, we're right at time. So thank you guys for being here. Is there anything, I always do this, and often somebody says something really brilliant. Is there anything that somebody wanted to say, even just a statement you wanted to make, you didn't get to say, that if you left here and didn't get to say it, you'd feel bad? Yeah.
If you want to get people interested in transparency, someone should invent the Farm Bill for transparency.
The Farm Bill for transparency. See, I told you somebody said something brilliant. Someone, if you want to make, say it again?
If you want to make transparency popular, build a Farm Bill.
If you want to make transparency popular, build a Farm Bill for transparency. I like that idea.
That's a great idea.
Actually, I don't think we can end on anything better than that. So wonderful we're actually going to follow up with probably every single one of you from the Sunlight Foundation, but really excited to be talking about all this with all of you. And please do come to the happy hour here down at RFD. Thank you.
Nice to meet you.